few more people will join us as it goes on. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name's Phoebe Weston and I'm a biodiversity reporter from The Guardian. It's my pleasure to be chairing this joint webinar between the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, the PFLA, and Plantlife. Now we're doing it because tomorrow, as well as being the first day you can go and get a pint from a pub, is also National Meadows Day. Now the PFLA is a membership organisation of farmers, many of whom are grazing species-rich meadows. And Plantlife, as I'm sure many of you will have heard of, is an organisation that is looking to protect and restore these valuable habitats. So wildflower meadows are often described as rainforests of the UK, and rightly so, because they are incredible for biodiversity. You can get up to 40 species of plant and fungi per square metre. So they're really important, and I'm sure many of you are aware, wildflower meadows are declining in the UK. We've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the 1930s. So very important that we maintain and promote them, these fantastic habitats, which unfortunately many people may not have had the pleasure to sit in at this time of year and hear the amazing sounds and colours that come out of them. So we really want this to be a celebration of that habitat. And we've got experts from Plantlife here who are also and PFLA, who are going to provide a lot of insight into these amazing habitats. So Plantlife are going to provide an overview, and then hopefully Wi-Fi and weather dependent, we're going to go and look at some wildflower meadows on the ground. We're going to do, the presentation is going to be about 35 or 40 minutes long, and then there'll be time, sort of 15 minutes for questions at the end, but please do ask lots and lots of questions. I'll get through to as many of them as I possibly can. We're basically going to hold the questions to the end, but yeah, I'll make a list of them. Now this is the first of 4 webinars that PFLA and Plantlife are doing together on meadows. I'll talk a bit more about that at the end, but let's jump into today's webinar. Now we're going to hear from Phoebe Miles, a project manager of Magnificent Meadows in Wales, and Matt Pitts, a meadow advisor. They're both from Plantlife. But first, hopefully, we're going to go to Andy Rummings, who's a PFLA farmer on the Wiltshire-Gloucestershire border, who did have his umbrella up earlier, so I'm hoping it's not still raining, but and hopefully his Wi-Fi's up to it. But Andy, could you give us a tour of what your meadow looks like right now?
Hi folks, yes, the rain has stopped, which is great.
Oh, I think you need to turn off mute.
Yep, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Oh, can you hear?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Go
oh
for
God, sorry,
okay.
It's just me.
That's all right. Yes, so welcome everybody. I'm here on the Wiltshire-Gloucestershire border near Cricklade, and in a floodplain meadow at Waterhay Farm. So it's a beef farm, but we're also very lucky to have a 4-acre floodplain meadow that is pretty diverse. So I'm just going to quickly show you a bit about it and what's going on. So we've got lots of great bonnets, which is sort of a classic floodplain meadow plant, and it's really great. These kind of really dark drumhead flowers, and we've also got lots of peppered saxifrage, which is a little member of the carrot family. We've got lots of yellow vetchling, tufted vetch, and then also a large amount of grasses, and the timothy is just coming out here. But yeah, it's a pretty diverse place, and we've got the Thames in the background. You see a bit of a line of willows and trees. So there's also a lot of insect life, not today, that's very visible because of the it's pretty cold and miserable. But the structure of grass heads and plants means that we've got literally thousands of damselflies. In fact, there's one just there that you might be able to see. think that's a blue-tailed damselfly, but yeah, to get the book out. So yeah, it's a great place. It's a really enjoyable place to be, and I just wanted to yeah, show you very briefly what it's like today.
Andy, could you tell us a bit more about how you're managing your meadow?
Sure. So we are cutting it for hay and we'd ideally like to cut it in about sort of a week's time. And then we use that hay for our in-calf suckler cows, our dry suckler cows, when we house them in November and feed them on this type of hay all the way through to when they calve in March. And it's brilliant. It's just the job for that. And I think the secret to managing floodplain meadows is actually having somebody who wants the hay and with the right class of livestock to utilize that hay. So that's what we do. And then we aftermath graze it in the autumn. But we have to be quite careful because it does flood. And yeah, a third of our farm floods. And so this is a very different view in the winter. And this year, the bottom part of this field, the greener part, where there is no species, no flowers at all this year, was underwater from end of September to middle of March, which was pretty horrific. But anyway, there we are.
So, and could you tell us a bit more about how year on year your meadow looks different, and you know, maybe you're seeing species this year that you haven't seen in previous years?
Yeah, so every year is vastly different. So on the drier bit here that didn't get flooded, we've got loads of great bonnet, and the grass growth is not that great because it was relatively dry in April and May. But you only have to go onto the flooded area where the grass is dominant. But some years we get, you know, tufted vetch in huge heaps, literally 3 foot high in lovely bundles. This year it's about 20 centimeters high. So the visual color each year is different. Different plants like different years. The hay yield can be quite different, and also whether you can actually even get to it changes. And my uncle, who's been here 60 years, every month of the year we've known a flood. It's more often in the winter, but a flood in July, October, March, it's all possible. So it's a dynamic system, but that's why I think it's really interesting. But it does take a bit of, yeah, you have to sort of plan for the unexpected.
Yeah. So I'm sure lots of people have questions for Andy, and he's going to stay on the webinar. So if you do, please write them now and we'll try and get to them at the end. In the meantime, I think let's hear a bit from Phoebe and Matt from Plantlife about their work with meadows. And thanks very much, Andy. We'll definitely be coming back to you a bit later on.
Thanks very much, Phoebe. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully we won't have any major glitches. Hopefully everyone can see that. My panelists can see that as well. Maybe just they could give me a thumbs up just to confirm they can see that screen. That's great. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Phoebe Miles just to give you a brief overview of some of the work that Plantlife is doing around meadows at the moment.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, folks. This is really fantastic turnout. Shame I can't see you all. I think you can only see the panelists. I think that's the way it works on these particular type of webinars. But great to think of all of those people across the country. I've seen some pretty diverse locations pop up on the right panel. I just wanted to say a bit to begin with about Plantlife's meadow work. We've really been working at pace on species-rich grassland and meadows since 2013, after we released a report. It's called Our Vanishing Flora, and it really highlighted the loss of wildflowers from each county across England since the Queen was crowned in 52, 53. And our patron, the Prince of Wales, was prompted by this report to suggest that each county should identify an ancient meadow and from its green hay and seed create a new one, and the Coronation Meadows project was born out of this idea. And that project actually created 90 new meadows across England. And we're now seeing new meadows created from the 3rd and 4th generation of those meadows, using the donor hay and seed from those coronation meadows. Shortly after that, Save Our Magnificent Meadows kicked in 2014. And that was a programme that was really designed to support landowners as well as individuals and families to get the know-how and the skills to create their own meadows. And over 900 landowners were trained, and 9,000 people, individuals and families, joined various training days, workshops, community days and fun events to learn all about how to create your own meadow at scale in a rural landscape, or mini meadows in your own garden, or on your hospital grounds or wherever. More recently, we've got Save Magnificent Meadows in Wales, which is a project I'm currently leading. That's a National Trust collaboration, and we are aiming to create another 300 hectares of species-rich grassland across Wales, working with farmers, landowners outside of the National Trust as well, and private farms, and also with quite a lot of municipal and public estates, including hospitals, GPs, local authorities, trying to promote natural seeding techniques on areas including road verges, roundabouts, trying to promote our native wildflower meadows. Pollinator Meadows is another project that's coming up and will be launched, was launched last year. Coronavirus has stymied efforts a little bit to do the big launches, but we'll see those coming up in the next 6 months to a year. And that's really all about connectivity of those meadows for insect life. And so all in all, we've created about 4,500 hectares of meadow since 2013. And we really want to step up efforts. And the only way that we can do that is collaboratively, working with all sorts of folks, meadows groups, establishing new self-led meadows groups to work at regional level to help each other out, creating meadows on their own land. And through the Road Verge campaign, we also hope to link up our efforts to look at municipal space that's in our towns and cities, not just the wider countryside. One legacy I wanted to mention of the projects that we've done so far is a huge amount of advice that does still sit online on the Save Our Magnificent Meadows website. And there's lots of stuff up and coming through the new projects, including fungi training, which is a picture there on the right. Fungi is our forgotten taxon in meadows. The UK is incredibly important for grassland fungi. Magnificent Meadows Wales is offering training, and there's also going to be training offered in Scotland because they're two stronghold areas for grassland fungi. So watch this space for training opportunities coming up soon. And I will hand over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. So I'm going to give you a very sort of brief whistle-stop tour, really, I suppose, of some of the things that makes Meadows special. I think, as Phoebe earlier alluded to, that we've lost a huge number of meadows over the last century, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about why we've lost so many meadows. But we still do have some of these really rare and species-rich meadows surviving, and people often ask, why are they still surviving? And I suppose some of the reasons really is that they've survived in remote and isolated locations, partly because the land was too difficult, it maybe have been too steep or too wet to plough and to agriculturally improve. Also, you've often got sympathetic landowners who sometimes have had the foresight to carry on managing these pieces of land. The image there you're looking at is one of Plantlife's nature reserves over in Herefordshire called Jones Hill. This is 50 acres of wildflower meadows. It was purchased by us in 1997, and prior to that, quite a lot of the land within that 50 acres had actually been ploughed during the Second World War. And we managed to start restoration process through a couple of meadows that did still exist on this site. And then gradually over the years, by changing the management, we've managed to restore around 50 acres of meadow back to species rich. Yeah, thinking about what makes meadows really important, I mean, partly it's just the sheer number and the diversity of wildflowers that you'll get in a meadow, particularly in these very species-rich meadows and these very old, ancient meadows. If you think about an area of chalk grassland, potentially you can get up to 45 species in a square metre, which is pretty mind-blowing, really. And if you look at a field, this field here, again, this is a photograph from Jones Hill. It's one of my colleagues, Trevor, there, who's doing a bit of a count of some of the flowers. And typically you can get up to 140 species in these wildflower meadows. So they really are very diverse from a plant point of view. But not only plants, that's the interesting thing. I suppose if you think about it, plants are the kind of, they're at the bottom, and then you think about all the other things that use plants. There's quite a lot of staggering statistics really when you think about it. So approximately, what have I got here? 270 species of bee are supported by wildflowers in meadows primarily. And if you look sort of slightly wider, we're looking at well over sort of 1,300 different species of insects and invertebrate that are associated with wildflower meadows. The photograph here is a shrill carder bee. This is one of our rarest bumblebees, believe it or not. And it's really restricted to a few places in the UK, mainly South Wales and parts of southern England as well. And I suppose part of the reason it's restricted is because of these wildflower meadows, these very species-rich meadows being restricted, but also because of its food plants. Like snapweed and scabious. Again, I'm just kind of picking out a couple of key, because there's so many, we could spend hours talking about insects and invertebrates. Again, another particularly special butterfly, marsh fritillary. Again, this is increasingly rare now in the UK. And again, because of the loss of these species-rich meadows, I guess, is why a lot of these insects and invertebrates have become so rare. This particular butterfly relies on the flower there in the bottom right-hand corner, which is devil's bit scabious. That's a late flowering plant. So if you cut your meadow early, the likelihood is that that flower will not be flowering. So of course the food plant for this butterfly is not necessarily present in all meadows. So there's this kind of strong correlation between the invertebrate population and the way that a meadow is managed. And again, birds. I mean, we all kind of think about the kind of classic birds of the countryside, skylarks, curlews, lapwings. Most of these populations have crashed over the last century, and partly it's because of changes in farming practice and because their habitats have gone. Ultimately, most of these are ground nesting birds, and traditionally, historically, they were nesting in hay meadows, and those hay meadows were normally cut much later than they currently are. A lot of hay meadows are now cut for silage and therefore cut much earlier. So of course that has had a knock-on effect on some of these very iconic bird species. So just kind of looking slightly wider, a wider perspective about some of the values and why meadows are worth saving, I suppose, really. I've just kind of highlighted there a few of the kind of key things. And these, I'm going to just unpick these a little bit more in a little bit more detail in a second. And a lot of these now start to tie into some of the new agricultural legislation that's coming through, the agriculture bill that's coming through in the UK at the moment, and also the environment bill as well. So let's just pick these up in a bit more. So it's interesting to think about carbon storage. There's a lot of information around carbon storage. There's a lot of research looking at farming and how farming can help support our sort of reducing our impact on the climate. It's a very complicated process, very technical, but there's no doubt that soil obviously locks up huge amounts of carbon, and we think that probably sort of meadows and pasture land probably lock up as much, if not more, than woodland as well. So that's a really interesting thing. And yet there's a lot of work going on to try and understand all of these relationships and how this all works. carbon is often released when you cultivate the land. So in a permanent pasture and in a species-rich grassland type context, generally the land is not cultivated, so therefore more carbon is locked up in the soil. So that's the theory anyway. And another thing that's becoming increasingly important, I think everyone's aware of, I mean, last year was a crazy, crazy winter. And I think most people are starting to realise that our climate is definitely changing, and the cycling of these very, very wet winters and then very extreme dry periods in the summer is probably likely to be what happens in the future. So people are trying to think about this idea of flood storage. There's no doubt that these kinds of meadows, these floodplain meadows, potentially can play a role in storing flood water and reducing the risk to other places. Again, permanent pasture is one of those places that soaks up water. It helps it to infiltrate into the ground better, and then it's slowly released back into rivers rather than rushing back into rivers on arable land. The other thing about pasture is that actually it reduces the amount of erosion because you haven't got lots of bare soil. So very different to arable land. So again, another part of this kind of what people are now considering public goods. So this is an area, this is quite an interesting new project that's happening over in West Sussex. So they're trying, the image that you can see there now is historic tithe maps from the 1800s that have been plotted over the top of the modern map. The idea of plotting the tithe maps is so that they can see the historic pattern of land use in the 1800s, in the 1840s. This is actually the Western Rother in Sussex. You can see running right through the middle from sort of east to west is the Rother, the river there. And that sort of turquoise colour is basically where all the floodplain meadows were in the 1840s. So this project is looking at trying to restore some of those meadows back into the landscape, partly because a lot of them have been lost to agricultural improvement into arable crops. And of course, that's causing more flooding and more erosion. So this ties directly into that idea that actually putting grassland and species rich back into those kinds of landscapes can potentially help with flood prevention. So I think this is not far away from where Andy was talking, where Andy was just then. Cricklake, this is in Wiltshire. This is a very, very old floodplain meadow. And in fact, this actually has the UK's largest population of snakehead fritillary, which you can see there. I mean, just unbelievable. And this is one of these interesting meadows that was probably owned by the church, has had continuous management for, I think the records go back for at least 1.5 centuries of how this meadow was managed in a very, very kind of continuous way, regular management, which has ultimately led to this. Just absolutely unbelievable. And just to mention here as well, and I think Emma may well be on the call somewhere, from the Floodplain Meadows Partnership. They're an organisation that's been working with lots of people across the country to try and help support and advise on the restoration and the management of floodplain meadows. And they've got this amazingly brilliant technical handbook which is freely available online. So another thing that these kind of species rich areas and grasslands potentially can do as well is this idea of helping to support ecological control in and around more intensively managed farmed landscapes. This is an arable field here, and we're looking at a wildflower margin on the edge of an arable field, or a species-rich margin. So potentially you're bringing in beneficial insects into that margin, which can help with your control of the pests that you don't want in your arable land. So now that's a complicated slide that Phoebe Miles might be able to explain a bit more.
I won't go into detail, but I'll simply say that there's a growing body of evidence that does show if you have flower-rich areas, headlands or meadows adjacent to cropland, that it can actually reduce the pest loads and damage to those adjacent crops. And now there's lots of factors that depends on, but there's some really fantastic evidence coming out of Rothamsted and other UK and European based institutions that suggests this, and we've got plenty of projects that again we overlap within the Meadows space around arable flora and the need for flower-rich headlands, this being one of the various benefits.
Thanks, Phoebe. This is also being looked at as well from a like a top fruit and a fruit growing perspective as well. You imagine orchards have huge amounts of green grass in between all of those fruit trees. Pollination is a really fundamental thing to get fruit setting and obviously get good crops. So they're looking, and there's various bits of research and experiments going on in the southeast of England at the moment, looking at trying to put more species-rich grassland habitat back into some of these very intensive orchards to try and help both with positive pollinator insects, but also some of the insects as well that can help to fight the negatives. So it's a really interesting space, as Phoebe said. There's another one for you, Phoebe, here about cultural landscapes. So I'll just say that if you think about a lot of our very oldest, most species-rich meadows often are associated with historic landscapes. You think about the Yorkshire Dales, a landscape that hasn't fundamentally changed for a very long time. So you've got lots and lots of bits of fragments of species-rich grassland that kind of exist in this kind of pattern of this anciently enclosed or ancient landscape. Again, in Sussex, in the High Weald as well, we've got an anciently enclosed landscape. Field patterns haven't changed since the medieval, and again, you get lots and lots of bits of species-rich grassland in amongst those historic areas.
Yeah, I think I won't add much, but just to say that if this is a celebration of meadows, then we should be celebrating the cultural heritage of meadows as well as the natural heritage. We like to say that it's just as much part of our cultural heritage as Shakespeare. Thinking of a UK without its meadows is, to me, thinking of the UK without its racist literature. And we're working with the National Trust across Wales, trying to think quite carefully about what sort of meadows actually would have existed and evolved with the buildings that were built there and the communities that lived there. And taking that sort of historical perspective should be the priority of conservationists such as ourselves in Plantlife. That's how, you know, meadows are constantly evolving, and going back to a baseline in time is a complicated thing, but it's really important to appreciate meadows and species-rich grasslands as cultural landscapes, and it's often a way to engage people differently in them. Sometimes biodiversity and wildlife doesn't chime with everybody, but cultural heritage can, and we'll be offering some more opportunity to come and get involved in traditional management techniques, including things like scything as part of our project, which is always very popular.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. I mean, I just to add to that, really, I suppose if you want to see a really nice species-rich piece of grassland, often a really good place to go is a church, or a church. Well, sorry, not the church, the churchyard. You know, so many of our churchyards, so many of our castles, so many of our sort of earthworks, you know, ancient hill forts, burial mounds, places like Stonehenge have got amazing pieces of species-rich grassland that have survived in that historic landscape all around the country. So yeah, what makes a meadow? Let's just kind of unpick this a little bit here as well. So it's interesting because it's kind of this combination of things really that makes these wildflower meadows so special. I suppose it really starts with the soil. The soil is the kind of fundamental building block that kind of dictates what may be possible, what might grow in a particular place. How wet the soil is, again, will dictate the kind of plants that might grow there. And then it's really about the kind of management that then interacts with the things that grow there that ultimately makes, or has made, historically made these very species-rich meadows. And it's probably as much about the continuity of management, that repeated cycling of management over long periods of time. So it's the combination of soil and the management really ultimately that kind of dictates the species or the community of wildflowers that you'll get in a meadow. And we can break that down in a very scientific and detailed way, but I'm just going to do it fairly simply for you, just to kind of give you a bit of an insight into the variety of different wildflower meadows across the country. So we can break it down in this kind of fairly general way. And of course, yeah, we can really dive down into this and get very technical and very scientific. But again, you can see that these different plant communities ultimately, so you'll get a different plant community on a more acidic soil, on a more neutral soil, and calcareous, and again on a wetter soil as well. So that has a strong bearing on the kind of plants that you would expect to see in those kind of meadows. I'm just going to give you a few examples of those, but I suppose the point to make really is that meadows and the character of meadows is variable around the country, depending on the soil, depending on the management, depending on the altitude of how high or how low that meadow is. So there's kind of this combination of factors that makes up this plant community. So this is a fairly typical sort of neutral meadow. You can see a lot of red clover in there, and there's probably some yellow rattle as well, I think, in there. So that's again fairly typical. So that's a sort of middling soil, sort of bit of sand, bit of clay, sort of fairly typical. Lots of places neutral. Often you get common spotted orchids in these kind of meadows as well. But again, this is a completely different kind of meadow here. So we're in the uplands, we're in the Yorkshire Dales. These are the Muka meadows, which are right in Swaledale in Yorkshire. A big complex of very, very ancient meadows that have been traditionally managed as hay meadows. Excuse me. They're in private ownership, but they're actually designated as a site of special scientific interest now, but again, have been managed sympathetically for a very, very long time. And again, you're looking at particular plants that you would expect to see in these meadows. So there in the front there, you've got wood cranesbill, which is a geranium, which I expect most people recognise. And then you've also got pignut. So there's subtle differences between meadows, although there are a load of generalist wildflowers in community, wildflower communities. There are these particular specialties that will maybe only appear in an upland hay meadow and maybe not in a lowland. So that's kind of what makes these meadows, I think, really fascinating and interesting. So again, this is something that's close to Phoebe's heart here. We've got a wax cap there on the right, which is a golden wax cap, I believe. Is that correct, Phoebe? She's nodding, thank you. Again, these are often associated with very, very old pasture. So I think it takes a long time for wax caps to get established and to spread across pasture. They're often associated with these acidic grasslands. And I think Phoebe mentioned this earlier, that the stronghold for these is Wales, and also
Scotland and north of England.
Thank you, and Scotland, yes, exactly.
And the northern counties of England.
Yeah.
And very dependent on animal dung. So, you know, grazing, livestock is incredibly important to these sites.
Although interestingly, they often do appear in churchyards as well. So certainly in the southeast of England, we've got some acidic soil, sand and clay, and they often appear in churchyards, and often again appear in these more permanent pastures. And on the left there, we've got a harebell. Again, not necessarily a specialist of acid grassland, but often found in acid grassland and also in chalk grasslands as well. But again, very beautiful flower. So moving on. So this is a piece of chalk grassland. So this is actually a nature reserve that's owned and managed by the Kent Wildlife Trust on the Kent Downs. It's called Magpie Bottom. And we're looking there at a man orchid, which is a particularly rare orchid, very much associated with chalk and limestone. And that is very much restricted to the southeast of England, again, because of that, I suppose, because of that geology, really, the geological connection. Again, lots of other specialists on chalk and limestone, thyme, marjoram, rock rose, so lots of flowers that do well on that kind of soil. So we're looking here at a much wetter piece of pasture here. These types of pastures have different names depending on where you are in the country. So in the southwest, these pastures are called Culm grassland. In other parts of the country, they're called purple moorgrass and rush pasture, particularly in the uplands in the north. But typically they're often quite waterlogged for quite large periods of time during the year. So of course you get these reeds and the plants that really enjoy the very wet conditions. And we're looking there at, this is a site in Fife in Scotland, and absolutely covered in ragged robin. I'm going to hand over now to another meadow owner, who I've forgotten his name. So Phoebe, can you remind me his name?
Yes, this is Frank Hunter, our Coronation Meadows man in Cumbria.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So these are the Calcareous first coronation meadows. They're at Piper Hole, at Ramsdale, sitting at somewhere around about 1,000 foot above sea level. Typically based on limestone. What we've got in the mix here, even though we're at the end of June, we're a long way on with the flowers. We've got a mix of red clover in there, the self-heal coming back. We just want to point out the eyebright, and we've got a mix of we're just looking for yellow rattle at the moment. It is now turning to seed. We've got a pretty diverse amount of plants here, which means early growth rates mean we've got food for cross-pollinators, so we're hitting that sector. We've also got quite a herbal mix which we feed to our dairy. That is a herd of dairy goats, not cows. It does affect the quality of the milk in a good way by feeding it as forage, as hay or haylage. And we've got the medicinal values to boot. So we're not looking at pouring a lot of man-made medicines into the animals, be them the goats, the sheep or the cows. We use the plantains, obviously. It's just one of those things. It's a medicinal plant in its own right. So at the stage we're at now, a lot of the bottom grasses are coming up. Some of the red clovers are dying off. The white clovers are dying off, just as you would expect to see. Hawk bits coming through, massive yellow. And the yellow rattle, it's done its suppression, even though it's been very, very dry. We are starting to regain some grass growth from the little bit of rain, but also from the holistic management, where our grass roots are going way, way down into the ground now. And it's all about the animals managing the ground, hoofing the ground for aeration through winter, programming the grazing season so that we can monitor when the grass is going to be ready for shutting up for the haylage, or the hay that we make in June, July. And also sort of looking after the way the plants grow, getting them upright, the amount put on in the early February so that we do get some value from it. Goat muck is like rocket fuel, so it's very, very sparse and not tons per acre, because we just don't have that much of it, even though we run over 300 dairy goats. We're proud of what we've got. There's county wildlife sites, there's triple SI hay meadows, there's a coronation status, and we're really proud of what we've got and how we use it in the food industry.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's brilliant. So yeah, just thinking about meadows in the sort of wider UK context. So this statistic of 97% and 3%. So yeah, hopefully that the images there kind of speak for themselves. That you know, most of our grassland across the UK has been agriculturally improved, and we still, you know, although we've done a lot of work over the last 20 or so years to kind of start to turn the tide, there's still a long way to go. I'm just going to kind of like unpick that really a little bit and just explain why we've lost so many of these meadows really. So this is, I think this is really interesting statistic. If you think about the value and the importance of hay, certainly through the Victorian period and at the beginning of the 20th century, just looking at the number of horses, these are working horses that were in the UK. Staggering number of working horses, all of those horses were being fed on hay. That's horses in the rural economy, but also all these horses in the urban economy as well that were doing, you know, so much work for us. So therefore hay was a really valuable crop, and of course every scrap of land was being used at some point for hay making. And if you think about how hay was made historically as well, it was made by hand. It was a slow job, it was hard work as well. So And it was very weather dependent as well. So often haymaking was the job that was pushed and pushed and pushed back later and later and later. So therefore, a lot of the wild flowers that were in these hay meadows were able to flower and set seed because haymaking was often done quite late. So this is a fun thing. Hopefully you can see that. This is the Acton Scott Historic Working Farm in Shropshire. And they play around using some of this kind of early 20th century agriculture equipment. But you imagine using that to make hay, it was a lot slower than what we currently have. So, you know, you get these gradual, and I guess this is probably a story that's very familiar to most people on the call, this change in agricultural technology, particularly during and post-war. You think about the policy changes after the war in terms of wanting to be more self-sufficient in food, during and after the war. So farmers being encouraged to plough and to basically try and maximise their productivity. And of course, I guess the result of that change ultimately meant the demise or the decline of a lot of these species-rich meadows. One thing, the change from haymaking to silaging, again, you think, why would you silage? But of course, silaging from a farming perspective is so much easier, so much quicker, not weather dependent. You know, but that one change alone means that flowers don't have a chance to flower and set seed. And then you also think about the agricultural improvements to pasture, to the idea of reseeding and ploughing up pasture and putting in these much more robust grasses, or much more, I guess, grasses that are faster growing and produce more crops. So you've got perennial ryegrass and clover, these very typical sort of modern mixes, which are generally, you know, very high in productivity. But of course, that change, that ploughing, meant again the loss of species richness at the same time. And again, this is a big one. Historically, most meadows and pasture was probably manured, and again, manure was put on by hand, and it was, the further away you got from the shed, the more difficult it was to take the manure, so the less manure those fields got. But of course, you know, modern technology, artificial fertilizers, all of a sudden grass responds very quickly to these artificial fertilizers, and then wildflowers struggle to compete in that context. So it's this combination of factors, really. And then also the increasing use of herbicides to spray out some of these flowers that would have been in these meadows as well. So all of these things really ultimately over that period, probably post-war up until the sort of 60s and 70s, really led to that big decline in these species-rich meadows. This is just an interesting map, really, again, looking, you know, or just visually looking, I suppose, at that change here. On the left there, you've got a map from the 1930s. This is of Wales, thanks to Phoebe for this one. But again, the green there is showing semi-natural grassland, so grassland that hasn't really been improved agriculturally. And you look at the same map in the 1980s, the red is showing land that has been agriculturally improved. So, you know, it really kind of brings home how much of that semi-improved, although that more species-rich grassland has been lost over the last 70, 80 years. And again, another statistic here showing the change really in grassland, you know, from the 1930s. And I suppose as a result of all those things I've just explained, really, total grassland going down, but I suppose the one to look at is the improved grassland, which is agriculturally improved, which sometimes trips people up because they think improved for what? Improved for flowers, but we're talking about agriculturally improved. And then you can see the decline there in rougher grassland in the more species-rich grassland, which is, you know, I guess accelerated through the 1950s and 60s as these agricultural policies came into being and people were encouraged to increase productivity and plough and reseed. So just looking, I suppose, at the potential, really, there's still a huge amount of potential out there. I mean, a lot of work has been done through lots of schemes. The agri-environment scheme started in the sort of late 90s, and of course a huge amount of work has been done through restoration. Farmers have been supported through money and payments to do restoration and to do management of grassland, all of these different grassland, these different species-rich grasslands up and down the country. And yet, you know, we still see this kind of habitat declining in the UK. And yet there's this potential, there's this huge potential out there. You know, this figure here that you know, there's potential 40% of our land, you know, has potential to be improved with more species richness. which is kind of interesting. And I suppose Plantlife really is an organisation that tries to work with as many people as possible. As I think, as Phoebe alluded to at the beginning there, we're obviously very keen on working with farmers and landowners. I think we're also sort of aware that this is challenging. It's not straightforward to do this. It requires, you know, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And you know, we're realistic and sort of pragmatic about that. But we're obviously very keen to try and work and support farmers and landowners to do this kind of work. I've got another video here of another PFLA member. This is Ollie from the southwest, but I'll let him talk.
Welcome to North Devon. My name's Ollie Walker. I'm a farmer here in Witheridge. I've been farming here for about 5 years. Not from a farming background. Got a great opportunity to come and take on a family farm, so that led us down this path to think a bit more about Meadows. Essentially approached Natural England and asked them if we could form a meaningful HLS agreement, maybe have a 10-year option on it. So we went into GS7 restoration of traditional meadows, which has allowed us to restore about 50 hectares of grassland. Our meadows are in the late cut hay supplement, so we'll cut our meadows from the 15th of July. That process just puts the seed back into the ground, just thrashing it about. So we started in 2017. We went on with green hay, which basically means you take a nice scalping of hay, cut off of the meadow, and then our green hay came from a local meadow close by that was sort of certified by Natural England. We organised a contractor to come in and power harrow our meadows. So basically kind of a traditional power harrow. You can do it many ways, but we chose a power harrow because we felt that would disturb the turf enough. And then we spread the green hay, which was cut that day, and transported just a few miles down to us. And then it was put into K2 rear discharge dung spreaders. So we had 2 of those running round. And we did 2 lots of about 50 bales, in fact. So quite big amounts, big days. Spread that evenly over the meadows. We did it over 2 years. The first block we introduced, actually we did it mechanically. We rolled it with a flat roller. The second year I did it, I actually put sheep in straight away afterwards to tread the seed in. And obviously they would eat any forage was there and poop out any seeds and just to suppress any grass growth that was coming back as well. And then we left those meadows, maybe took a little bit of grazing October time, but certainly by Christmas we let them alone and let them grow up. And we didn't touch them again until the following July, towards the end of July. And that was the time when we came to take our first hay cut. And yeah, a lot of things changed, the diversity, but we've certainly seen a lot more wildlife, I'd say, a lot more insects. I mean, they're absolutely crawling spiders, swallows and house martins everywhere. Yeah, it's lovely to see it coming on.
Well, that was really interesting. So he's really kind of, Ollie there has kind of really led us really nicely into to the subject of the next webinar, which we're going to sort of go in a lot more detail really into. We're going to sort of take a deep dive into the sort of practical and logistical side of meadow restoration and creation and management as well. So I'm going to stop talking in a second. I'm just going to pass over to Phoebe, who's going to just talk a little bit about this for a second.
Yeah, just to say a couple of things. There's lots of questions coming in about restoration and management techniques. We are dedicating a whole webinar to that. That's probably going to be the next one in the series that will be publicised by the PFLA. So we will have lots of information in that one about management, restoration and meadow creation on smaller areas as well. It might be your lawn or your allotments. So all are welcome to join that to hear more about restoration and management. Another cluster of questions was just about the economics, really, the financing and economics. Likewise, we've decided that's super important too, and that a whole webinar would be really good for that. So similarly, watch out for that one being announced by PFLA. To say that, you know, the weekend, I'm not sure how the weather will be, but if you wanted to get out to a meadow near you, there's various ways of finding out what's nearby. The wildlife trusts have an inventory on their website of meadows that they own and that are publicly accessible. Similarly, the National Trust has a South East of England network up on their line. I don't know why just the South East, but if you're in the South East, then there is one on the National Trust website. And you can also have a look at the Coronation Meadows, but you do need to check if they're publicly accessible because not all of them are. I think that's it, and we'll probably hand back to Phoebe Weston, who's been having a look at the questions with me as well. We're not necessarily going to be able to address all of them, but I'll hand over to Phoebe to see what we can answer today.
Good to get Andy back on as well, wouldn't it, hopefully? Is Andy going to come back?
Yeah, we've got lots of questions for Andy. First of all, thank you so much, Matt and Phoebe, for that presentation. It was so interesting and a real pleasure to see the diversity of meadows in the UK. I really enjoyed that. So we've had more than 70 questions, and as Phoebe mentioned, this is the first of a number of webinars, so hopefully people will be interested in listening to the subsequent ones. I've grouped the questions together. Now the first cluster are for Andy, who I can hope can hear me. Now these were asked by a number of people: Anna, Alistair, David, Joe, Bill, John and Gordon, all wanted to know a bit more, Andy, about your meadow and what sort of plants have colonized it, and what you do about rushes or other weeds, and also scrub. And another question, a group of questions, was about flooding and whether there's anything you can do about it and what you do about the damage. And sorry, one last question to that, which was from Gordon, which is what's the right stock for your meadow?
Okay, I'm also happy to stay on a bit longer as well. So yeah, there's some really good questions there. So starting with the first one, I've seen a lot of reed, and reed canary grass move from the riverbank into the meadow quite a long way in a short period of time. So that's moving in. Got tufted hairgrass, which is like clump forming, moving, sort of becoming more widespread. And then seeing some, I think they would call it sort of undesirable kind of grasses and plants that are sort of associated with compaction. But there's actually very little biomass in a lot of it. It's a very thin layer. So yeah, and that was due to extreme flooding. But I don't want to do anything too quickly. I think it would be really wrong to start chain harrowing, to do things to reduce compaction, overseeding. I really don't want to do that, and I wouldn't even think about doing any of that until perhaps next year or the year after. And you know, often it can take 7-8 years for things to sort of go back. And you've got to remember that floodplain meadows are dynamic systems. The big flood that knocks everything out is allowing new niches and kind of it sort of resets the clock and then things build up again. The problem we might be getting nowadays is we're getting a bit too many of these big events that are knocking the diversity back. So I'm not going to do anything really. What I am going to make sure is that we do cut the hay. There's a lot of silt been dropped, and we need to get that nutrients off. We need to keep that, you know, phosphorus levels down. And so we have to make hay, whatever, but we need to do it without doing any more damage or compaction. We then got to be really careful with the aftermath grazing this year. I want to leave it a bit longer going into the winter because I can see a fence line of where we grazed it a bit harder on one area and a little less harder on another. And you can still see that now. And the area that was slightly overgrazed is looking a lot worse. So really careful aftermath grazing, getting all the animals off before it even gets even slightly wet. I've got a series of dip wells across the field in profile. So I've got I've got a bit more notice. If I keep an eye on them, I can see the water levels coming up way before we get a flood. So yeah, don't do anything rash. Look, observe, monitor, take a few notes. I would just say a thing about docks. My uncle hates docks, and so yeah, we do a little bit of dock control, but we don't have too many in that field. But we have a lot more in the field next door, which is grazed and not made hay on.
Dock control. What do you use for your dock control?
Uncle uses glyphosate, which is quick, easy, and cheap. However, it can leave. You've got to be careful applying it, otherwise you basically make a big area of bare soil, which is then a bit counterproductive. So yeah, I would again talk to other people. Look how big the infestation is. Do you need to do it? Can you top off the top? Yeah, look at everything carefully and don't act too fast.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Also, just I might have missed it a bit in response to Gordon's question about what's the right stock.
I think he might have. Andy? We'll leave that hanging.
Okay, we'll come back to that if Andy comes back online. Oh, hi Andy, can you hear
I'm
us?
Here. I can hear. Yeah. So no, it's an absolutely crucial question, and we've got to create more meadows, but we've got to have an outlet for the products, which is hay and grazing. And so you've got to have the right animals to do that. Modern dairy cows, you know, nightmare for that sort of thing. So dry suckler cows, we find are great. Low energy, low protein hay, gets the dung really firm. You use less straw housing in the winter. It's great. Keep an eye on the body condition. I like to bring ours in pretty fat, so they've got a bit of reserves in case the hay is a little not great. But yeah, so dry suckler cows are brilliant. And it's a nice environment in the winter in there. It smells great. You open a bale of hay and it's like a herbarium. You know, you've got things like this, which is a snake's head patillary seed capsule, which I got out of a North Meadow bale of hay. So yeah, yeah, it works for us, and it's about having a system that can utilize that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm conscious that we've already gone over, so we'll just do another 5 minutes of questions. One I thought was really interesting was from Andrew. In terms of biodiversity, how do new meadows compare to old ones? And maybe that's for Matt or Phoebe, that question.
Okay. Well, I mean, a tricky one, isn't it, to answer? I mean, ultimately, depends on where the seed comes from for creating the new meadow. I mean, meadows will evolve over time, and I think you've got to look at a meadow creation as a long-term endeavour. Obviously, it will not be as diverse as the old ancient meadows, but over time, with the right kind of management and starting in the right conditions, you know, with all the right prerequisites, which we're going to talk about in the in the management and creation webinar, that you have potential to create something, but you know, it's definitely a long-term proposition. And obviously, some of these very species-rich meadows, you know, are often quite ancient and have been managed like that consecutively for tens of years. You know.
Yeah, can I just add as well, Matt? I mean, it really does depend on your site and your approach, and also on the things that we can't control, like how the weather acts year to year, which is increasingly crazy. And for example, on certain soils, you can retain a seed bank for quite a long time. So if you make room for those seeds to germinate, you might get some fantastic results quite quickly. Whereas on other types of soil, those seeds might deteriorate much more quickly. And when you create some germination gaps, you might just get weeds coming up, and it'd be quite tricky. So that's why knowing your site before you start on any at-scale meadow restoration is really important. Why we'd always advise people to do things like testing the soil to see what sort of texture structure it has, to see what pH and what sort of nutrient composition it has. Things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are all really Important things to understand in terms of having a low nutrient base to start with is ideal, but lots of us don't have that in the agricultural landscape or the urban landscape. So then it's a journey around reducing your nutrients over time, and we'll talk about that in some detail in the upcoming webinar on management and restoration techniques. But to summarise that, it's about understanding your site, making decisions specific to your site, and actually trying to not make too many predictions about how it will go, because a lot of stuff's out of our control. Things like the weather, last winter in terms of a lot of areas getting waterlogged, and this year not looking so great. A few summers ago we had a very, very long dry spell, which for some grasslands was fantastic because it suppressed the growth of competitive grasses, but for other grasslands that needed to be grazed because their farmers needed to graze them, it was disastrous. So actually I would say hold off the predictions and observe. It's about learning how to observe, and the Magnificent Meadows website's got lots of advice about how to observe your site and tweak your management according to what you see.
That's great, thank you. Oh, go on, Matt, sorry.
I mean, once if you know your site, you've done the right preparation. Once you've seeded, you're not in the driving seat anymore to some extent. So, you know, it's about the soil, it's about the weather, the climate. And I mean, you have an impact in terms of the way you manage your meadow, but ultimately some of those other factors that we talked about, you know, have a huge bearing on what will do well in that location. So.
Great, thanks for that. Just a few more questions. So one is, I'm conscious there are probably a lot of people watching this who don't have meadows and might just have a lawn or, you know, a strip of grass. What tips do you have for maximizing diversity on kind of mini meadows?
Yeah, shall I take that one, Matt? It's absolutely incredible across this country how many little seemingly boring patches of grass, if allowed to grow, can have real interest in them. And strangely, that's even more so in some of our urban and suburban and environments like towns and villages, because actually we haven't used those for food production for a very long time, if ever, and they can actually be lower in nutrients, the soil. So weirdly, areas in our gardens or by our roadsides or on the village green might be really quite well suited to wildflowers if they're allowed to grow and set seed. And if you've got a lawn or a patch in front of your house, or perhaps an area that you might like to create as a community meadow, we'd always advise you to basically stop mowing it and see what happens, see what comes up first. Sometimes they're quite interesting quite quickly, other times less so. You might get some weeds coming up, just dandelions and cat's ear and those common species that aren't quite enough for us and we want a little bit more. And then we'd always suggest sowing some yellow rattle after cutting the area late in the summer or early in the autumn. But really it's all about reducing the amount we're cutting our lawns and cutting our greens, or at least leaving a little strip at the side, and seeing what comes up, because it's absolutely amazing how many spaces across the UK have wildflower meadows that are just mown, and you just don't think of them as meadows because they're cut as lawns. They're sort of dry green rugs at the moment in Bristol, where I am. And if we just let them be, we could have meadows everywhere.
Great, thanks Phoebe. So just last question, there's been lots of people asking about how to make wildflower meadows, and we've got a whole webinar dedicated to that. So I'll encourage everyone who's asked that to tune into our next webinar. We'll go into depth on that issue. Another thing that people have been concerned about is how to stop people destroying wildflower meadows and make people care about them. I see lots on social media of councils still destroying wildflower meadows. And also there was an interesting question about recording. Are you recording new meadows that are being converted or planted?
I'll just say something about site protection. This is actually a really tricky one. I'm very, very pleased to see so many questions about it, because, you know, we're all quite right in asking, you know, is this just a kind of cute thing for conservation organisations to encourage? What are we actually doing to protect existing grassland from destruction, whether that's farmers ploughing it up or actually it being built on or whatever? It is really tricky because we don't have a grassland inventory really that's up to date anywhere in the UK. Wales has one that was last updated in 2010. England has not got a list of them, so it's really difficult to actually protect something if you don't know exactly where it is. And given these habitats, these landscapes are dynamic, they change over time. What once was maybe a very boring field might now be fantastic because somebody's put in some effort to restore that meadow. How do we keep a live inventory of our meadows and grassland in the UK in order to know what we've got and then protect it? So there's a lot of work to do, and Plantlife are working quite hard behind the scenes at the moment to influence quite a lot of the new post-Brexit legislation, particularly the Agriculture and the Environment Bill, to ensure that grassland is taken much more seriously than it has been of late. Indeed, it's true to say that woodland, peatland do get a higher profile with regards to what they do for us, if you like. And grasslands often sort of fall down the list a little bit. So we are, for example, suggesting an amendment to the Agriculture Bill to try and better protect, well, better identify and protect our existing grassland resource. Working with landowners and other organisations to do that will be a big effort, but we think it's worthwhile because grassland does so much for us, as we will explore in a future webinar all about the public goods that grassland gives us. But there's small things you can do. There's a petition online, please sign it, to save our meadows, Plantlife led. You'll be able to find that online quite easily. We have lots of material on the Plantlife website that will enable you to write to your MP or your councillor about altering road verge and village green management for wildlife and wildflowers. Please do use those tools. And get in touch with us about planning issues. We do have capacity in Plantlife to advocate for grassland that is being proposed as development sites, and we are doing that at sites across northern England and in Cardiff. We've had a recent success overturning a planning development in Caerphilly, at Gwenny, Domen, Meadows. So we can win. We do need people to add to the clamour. We need people to use the existing tools, and we're doing what we can behind the scenes. But you're quite right to say that we should all do more.
Great, that's a fantastic end, Phoebe. Thank you so much for that, and also thank you so much, Andy and Matt, for your really interesting presentations, and Ollie and Frank as well, who sent in those clips of their farms. And apologies we didn't get around to more questions. There were so many of them, which is great that there's so much interest in it. We've now got more than 90, but really hope that this will mean that you'll all tune in to future webinars. So as I mentioned, there's going to be 4 more looking, or is it 3 more? No, 4 more. So looking at the next one, how to restore a meadow, which we've had a number of questions about. The value they bring to your business in terms of contributing to soil carbon, pest resilience and flood resilience. We're also looking at biodiversity in meadows and the importance of pollinators, and how species-rich grassland can contribute to animal health and nutrition for consumers. So 4 really interesting subjects, very much hoping that you will tune into it. If you'd like to be involved in future webinars or have any further questions, please contact Jimmy from the PFLA, so that's jimmy@pfla.org.uk. Another question that we've been sent out is how people watch this afterwards. I think Jimmy's going to make it into a YouTube video, so that will get sent out for you all to watch, and you can watch in your own time. Thanks again for watching. Have a lovely weekend, and do visit a wildflower meadow if you can. Thank you. Bye.